I think we need to redefine what does professional really mean. It's gonna not be about the outward persona, how your offices are set up, or that this is a law firm, so everyone's in their power suits. I think that professionalism should have to do first and foremost with respect. Are people respected? Are people included and celebrated for their differences? Are they collaborative? Does every person's opinion count? That sort of a thing. I think that we could focus on really what makes us better equipped to perform our work and be able to reach those bars of excellence that we all want to reach, but not have it be defined by our attire or how our offices are set up.
Hi, I'm Denise Chaffin, and I am your podcast host for Talking TA. And today I have with me Jo Weech. And Jo Weech is the Global Head of People and Talent for Exemplary Consultants. Welcome, Jo. I look forward to our conversation. Do me a favor and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Denise, it's always just such a pleasure to speak with you. I always learn things from you when we've ever had our conversations, so I'm very grateful. I have the privilege of being able to serve different companies globally and in different industries on all things people operations. So HR, talent acquisition, learning and development, corporate operations. And the hope is that the work in 2025 will focus on ensuring that companies have the ability to have diverse hires in an inclusive process that is equitable for everyone.
Let's talk about that. Yes, because obviously there are some companies that are moving away from DEI initiatives, which is unfortunate because we have all worked so hard to create and try to support new programs, new initiatives, and to be part of that change. So let's talk about that, especially now that we've heard some government officials talk about removing DEI. What are your thoughts?
Oh, do we only have an hour and a half? This is like a half-day discussion, but I will say that my hope and my vision for 2025 is that companies will not keep replicating their processes that they have been doing since maybe the 1990s, but we all know that those were based on things done in the 1950s. So we're really just perpetuating hiring practices that do not make sense for our current workforce. And so I think that it really starts with top down. And if you can't get it top down because the people at the top aren't actually embracing the concept of making things inclusive for everyone, then you might just have to manage your up. And so I think that it really is going to start with the sourcing team. And they can't source for the right people if they don't know what skills and traits the person needs to be successful in the role. So nobody should even be trying to fill a role until there's been an intake meeting. And I don't care what you call it, whether you call it a kickoff meeting or a resource call or whatever you want to call it. But the point is that every person who is going to be in the interviewing process all gather together and focus specifically on what are the skills that are not negotiable, like they cannot do the job without those skills, and then what are the traits they need. And by traits, I mean things like the person needs to be able to come in, hit the floor running, be able to work independently with minimal supervision, or the person needs to be highly collaborative because they will be having to have deliverables amongst each other on the teams or with other departments. And so those are the kinds of traits that would be necessary to identify. I recently went through an interview where I was told that scorecards were all very positive, but I just happened to be not having something that they were looking for. So I asked the recruiter, well, what was I missing that they were looking for? And she didn't know. And I thought, oh my God, how are you supposed to recruit for this role if you don't even know? From the hiring team, what that is. It didn't make sense to me. So this is why it's imperative. And then the people who are sourcing, if they're only just using, let's just say, job boards and paying ungodly amounts of money to these job boards just to wait for people to apply, kind of like the post and pray, and then you just sort of look for people who already have uploaded resumes in there, then you're fishing in the same ponds and you're going to not have any diversity in your pool. So I highly recommend that you listen to the people who are very, very vigilant on ensuring that we have the right tools and the right places to look for people like Steve Levy and Dean DaCosta and Brian Fink. They've all helped our communities to be able to focus on how to do the sourcing. And then people like Carmen Hudson and Tila Jackson and Taji Pettis, people who are, and Maisha Hannon, these are people who are also helping us to understand what it is to be able to focus on making sure that we have these diverse pools. So once we can identify the diverse pools that we want to try to find people to fill the roles, then the next thing would be ensuring that artificial requirements are not prohibiting them to enter. For example, requiring a degree where seasoned experience could prove more valuable to the role, or other types of things like that, like 5 years of experience. When do you want someone who did 5 years with that one skill and were just sort of like a C plus at it? Or do you want someone who had been doing it for 3 years and they were A minus? So we don't want to limit ourselves to just people who are checkboxed with the different requirements. And then I think that making sure that the process is clear, so that first you're going to have your recruiter screen, and each candidate will be asked the recruiter screen questions so that there's no confusion. And then at the maybe like the peer level of interviewing, if it's a peer panel or whatever, then it's a different set of questions, but those are also going to be the same for every candidate who makes it to that level. And same thing with the hiring manager, that all of the questions being asked by that hiring manager are going to be the same to each individual. And the scorecards, which are created during the kickoff meeting, which identify the skills, the proficiency in those skills, the actual traits that are needed, are all going to be the same so that people can actually record as the interview is happening. They can record what they think, whether it's a thumbs up or rate someone from 1 to 5 or that sort of a thing. And then once the interview is completed, all of the feedback is already on that scorecard. And then the person interviewing just has the opportunity to write a couple of sentences if they want to just put a few notes in, and boom, it gets uploaded into the candidate profile. And so it saves time for the recruiter trying to track down, well, how did the interview go? That's one of the biggest, I think, cost factors, where the time it takes to get feedback for interviews is ridiculous. And then I think that the next thing that I think is important is ensuring that there isn't a feedback that comes in that says that these candidates were great, but they want to see more candidates. I'm baffled that people are still pushing back on this, and that no one has explained to them that it's like starting the recruiting process all over from scratch, and then all the people that they've just interviewed are going to be gone by the time the new crop is being interviewed. And I just don't think that that's been explained, and what the economic impact is on the companies for doing that. So then I would say that when all those scorecards are tabulated by the hiring manager, they can make decisions based on what skills and traits the person had to be successful. And the one who scored the highest would have the ability to be taken a chance on, so that they have the ability to perhaps be the best candidate for that role, because everyone saw all of those traits and skills totally in play. And so it takes the, oh, I really vibed with that person. Know, we vibed over Minecraft, or somebody might be have been, who had gone to the same college or whatever. It just takes individual biases, which most of the time are unconscious. For the people who say, "Oh, I'm not biased at all," it's like, okay, do you like skip? peanut butter or Jif peanut butter, right? And so if they have a preference, that's a bias. And so I think that people just aren't unaware. So I think that it will make it a fair process for everyone involved. And I think that the way to respect everyone through a structured hiring process is to let each person know exactly what all the steps are going to be in advance of them even having to go through it, and then keeping to a timeline. And the cardinal sin, as he says, when people say, "Oh, I can't make it, we have to reschedule." It's disrespecting the candidate, and it's basically a foretaste of what they're going to have in terms of experiences in that company when the project or the deliverables take precedence over the actual person being interviewed. It's like that is not a priority, and it really needs to be a number one priority in people's schedules.
Oh, it's so true. So true. And unfortunately, we have seen interviewing as almost a second priority, if you will, on people's schedules. And I realize, and we all realize that people are very busy and they have a lot on their plate. But until you have the right staff, how successful is your company going to be? Interviewing has to be your number one priority if you're interviewing people that day. If you're looking at your calendar, I mean, this is my professional opinion. We've lost some great talent to interviews that got canceled. It makes the company look disorganized, disinterested. It really reflects poorly on a company. When people now, if someone is sick or some emergency happens, that's one thing. But if you are canceling an interview because your boss has scheduled some last minute meeting that you think you have to attend, I don't agree. I think that you need to let that boss know, "I'm sorry, I have an interview today, and this is an important interview, could be an important addition to our staff, so this is my priority." I think it's okay to say that. And are people aware that they can say that, right? And you talk about unconscious bias. Let's dive into that a bit because that goes along with this whole DEI initiative or DEI conversation. And I think that unconscious bias, like you said, is something people don't even really realize. And our unconscious bias, it also shows up in our interviews, like you mentioned. And even if you create an interview questionnaire and you're going to share it with an interview team, how many times, in fact, there's some websites out there or some apps that you could use and plug in any information, and it'll find your biases for you. You might know what they are. I can't remember the name of them off the top of my head.
There's a whole list. In fact, I can share this with you later. There's actually a website that you can go to, and you can actually assess yourself on, like, I think 13 different biases and see where you score.
Right. Just even
Mhm,
certain
right.
words that you use, certain questions that you ask. Are the questions that you ask during an interview relevant to both females and males? Because sometimes in the past, people used to ask women questions related to their priorities at home or childcare or things like that, and they wouldn't ask males, right? Now, I don't know that that's going on now, but it's just an example. But there are so many questions. And again, we need to, like you said, rate our questions on interviews so that we are erasing any unconscious bias that might be present that we're not even aware of.
Including how the disparate impact of some questions on people from historically marginalized communities.
Right.
For example, during the pandemic when questions were being asked, "Well, do you have high-speed internet at home?" That's discriminatory. What you have to ask instead is, "Do you have access to high-speed internet?" Because that would that would make it not disparate. And
Wow,
so
I love that.
that is one question. The other one that I'm sure is not happening anymore, but people wanting to know about driving to work if you have a car, but that's just you don't put people on the spot like that. You just say, "Are you able to work on site at this address 3 days a week, hybrid, or 5 days a week," or whatever it is, and that gives the person the opportunity to say yes or no, because they could be taking public transportation or they could be driving. It's really not pertinent at that level. You don't make a hiring decision based on the answer to that question, so you should not ask that question.
I read something recently, speaking of remote work and return to work, that as companies are renewing leases on buildings right now, they're pushing to get people back in the office. So it'll be interesting, to your point, how many candidates are asked the question, Do you have transportation? Or is that a bias? Maybe that is a bias.
Well, yeah, instead of asking, like, "Do you have a reliable car to
Yeah,
get to
yeah.
work?"
You have
Yeah.
access to transportation to and from
We
work.
or access to reliable transportation, and then get recently, we've learned that there's a return to the office order for all these federal government workers. Why? Because the buildings are not being occupied, but here's my question: is the work getting done?
Yeah,
Has it been being done efficiently?
right.
That just release and let the buildings go. There's no reason to bring people in just because you're paying rent on a building. That is, like, the least logical decision.
In fact, but I just read something last week that says as companies, though, are as their leases expire, instead of renewing leases on buildings, they are going to let them expire to so that they do have more flexibility for people who really want to work from home. And that way, then they lose that as a reason to bring people back into the office because they don't want vacant offices. So it'll be interesting. And there was a percentage given of how many companies by 2028, I think, was it 20% or 22%, something like that, of companies, their leases will run out, and then they will not be enforcing return to office the way that they are now.
Well, the one thing about having a distributed workforce is that during the pandemic, people were hired from all over the country. They didn't have to be within 25 miles of the office, so to speak, right? And then what happened when all of the restrictions started to wane or whatever, then companies were just wanting people who lived locally to come into the office, at least on a hybrid basis. And I remember questioning a CEO saying, how is this fair? It's like you're punishing the people that just because they live within commuting distance of the office that they're now required to come in, but the people that were hired in Florida and Minneapolis or wherever, they don't have to come in. It's like, are you understanding how that's going to play out in terms of the public opinion in the company? And so there were people who actually started moving in with parents in other states just so they wouldn't have to do the commute. And I found that to be extraordinary. So I brought that to the attention of the CEO as well and said, this is what's happening. And now we have to file for unemployment insurance in these other states or whatever. Is this really the direction that you wanted to go? And I just don't think that people understand that impact on other people who've been able to flex their time. They start work and then they get their kids off to school, then they work again, and then they pick up their kids and bring them home. And then after dinner or whatever, then they're back in there again. So they distribute their work day and they're getting their work done. And sometimes it's more efficient because they don't really have the distractions of people popping into your office to chat or whatever. And I realized that part of the reason they wanted to bring people back was that, unfortunately for Gen Z, many of them had to do schooling from home. So they didn't have the ability to learn how to interact with others. And they were having issues with working on Teams when it was just simply all on, yeah, a video meeting. And so I think that there are a lot of things to consider with all of this, but if you are going to really want to have people working in the office, that only hire people within commuting distance and you make it clear from the job post that they will be required to come into the office. But don't do the bait and switch where they have the hybrid or they have the work from home and then all of a sudden now they're required to come in. I think that people who were not required to come in when they were hired should have that grandfathered in, if you will. And it's this sort of thing where a lot of people are leaving companies and changing jobs just because they started out in a job with certain expectations and then those were taken away. So it's almost like saying, okay, well, we're not going to pay for dental anymore. It's something that's severe for people and the impact that they have on their lives.
That's interesting. And when you talk about people too who started with the company, like say 4 years ago, right? During the heat of the pandemic. God, that started 5 years ago now. But anyway, let's say 4 years ago, people were able to work remote and they were set up their offices, and those were the expectations. Maybe they took new positions to do that. And now all of a sudden you're requiring them to come back in the office. They're looking for new positions and maybe they're not as available right now, but these people have all these tickler files going on saying, okay, I'm looking, watching this company, and they're going to start tracking companies who will allow remote work. So as soon as somebody can, they will. They'll jump even if they haven't done it yet. So it's you're putting the company at risk of losing good talent, especially when the employee feels like they're on a time clock right now, right? In other words, okay, I have to go into the office. I just got to do it, but I'm only going to do it until XYZ job comes along for me. They'll put me back in a remote situation. And again, there's going to be a lot of companies, like I said, they're going to be rolling off of leases and not re-upping their lease agreements and letting those buildings go, and they will have more flexibility. So this is an ongoing conversation for a long time. Another segue into this or away from this particular conversation, but it ties in, is the fact you mentioned too, global DEI initiatives, diversity initiatives. So now you've got people who are working all over the world. You have an opportunity to do more diverse hiring, right? Because you are doing things more remotely or hybrid or whatever. But now if you push people back to work, that changes the dynamic there completely, right? Because now you have people coming back into the office and you don't have that diverse culture, if you would, of people working all over the world, if you're a global company, and many are, to do the work that now you're insisting people do on site. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic change, especially with the new regulations that they're trying to enforce.
Right, for sure. And then I'm just even thinking about I live in the Washington, D.C. area. So you think about all the metropolitan areas and how a lot of us can't afford to live like close to Washington, D.C. because the rents are just they're not affordable. And so people are living like out in West Virginia for jobs. They're living as far south in Virginia as Fredericksburg. They're living in Pennsylvania and having to commute in. These are 2 hours each way. Why? Because it's not affordable. Nothing in this area is affordable in terms of housing and that sort of thing. So then you're thinking, okay, well, only the people who have high salaries and can afford to live close to the office are living there. Otherwise, where's everybody else? And then you think of all the people from Silicon Valley during the pandemic and they all moved to Montana. It was cheaper for them to fly into San Francisco or San Jose than it was for them to live in the whole Bay Area. So I think these are the kinds of things where we could just talk economics for the next half an hour or whatever, but it's just the way that things have gotten set up that it's just really it's not a simple conversation.
No, it's not. You kind of wonder too why more companies aren't setting up satellite offices where their employees are. Instead of insisting that your employees come to the office that's going to have a lease run out in 2 years, why not look at setting up or even give them that, oh my gosh, let's compromise. You come into the office until this lease runs out, be transparent about it. But what we'll do is because you and Joe and Mary and whatnot, you guys all live in this one particular area, and we want to keep you there and we want to keep you as employees. So we're going to set up a satellite office once our lease runs out. We'll start looking. And then that way, then those people that are like, okay, I can compromise. I can do this for a couple years. I mean, I think that there is a better conversation there. So, yeah. But let's talk also too about the employee resource groups, right? Employee resource groups, how many companies have developed employee resource groups that are more, would they be more on site? Probably not. I think that you can do those remotely as well, obviously, with no
Right.
problem. But how is all of this going to impact employee resource groups? I mean, because there's a lot of them.
I think that for starters, you need to look at the ones in your organization. And if you don't have any in your organization, I'd say the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to query everybody in the organization and ask them what sorts of groups would they like to have because usually it's just an HR decision or somebody in the C-suite says, "Oh, well we should have these and these are and then they put out causes that they care about." Whereas I think it needs to be employee owned and operated, so to speak, where the people who are all interested in environmental issues or homelessness or gaming or whatever it is that they're going to be getting together on, usually it should be something that would be impactful, not just around hobbies, but causes that people care about because most people do care about the environment, people, pets, that sort of a thing. And then it's really important not just to let them operate in a silo, but when they have the town hall meetings and everybody in the organization is getting on there, then one of the ERGs should be able to present who they are, what they're doing, and share pictures or videos of things that they have done together or how they've made an impact or fundraisers that they've done, et cetera. And And then there should be, I don't know if everybody uses Slack anymore, but I do know that some people have gone to Microsoft Teams, but there should definitely be asynchronous communication channels where people can just pop in, to be able to see what's going on and read what's happening in any different group and that sort of a thing. I think that would be very useful. I think that company culture really is something that just is. You don't create company culture. It is what is actually happening organically. And so that would be some way of being able to especially rally the people who are in distributed areas. They're not at headquarters, so to speak. It gives people the opportunity to interact with others.
It's interesting too. I have spent many years traveling a lot of times to the Bay Area because that's where a lot of my clients have been. And I remember on one particular trip, I went to one client and they referred to themselves as a collegiate culture. And I thought, okay, that's cool. And they were. They are a lot of professionals, people who had come out of the Ivy League universities, and they just had a very collegiate culture. And then I went to another company. They were a software development company, bright, super bright people working there. But you walk in and they've got like food set up and they've got this big open office environment and people bring their dogs to work. And, it was just so interesting to see the difference. But the people who were working for the software company that brought their dogs to work and had the food and just this ongoing kind of collaboration, very relaxed, very casual. And it's not to say that they didn't have some good education as well and have a collegiate kind of personality or group culture, but they just were in a more relaxed environment. So I think it depends on the environment too. I think your culture, when you look at it, if you have the chance to go around to different companies and see how they're set up and see how warm and friendly some places are and others are just less warm and friendly. They're more professional, they're stricter. It's really amazing to see the difference. But you also see the difference in the people. And I remember one time going to Google and I got to go in there and they had game tables set up and I mean they have restaurants and oh my gosh, they had a gymnasium, they had a dry cleaner. They had everything you think. I thought, okay, these people don't want their employees to leave. They just want them to camp here and stay. But they had kinda set that up, but at the same time, the people were more relaxed, and it just seems like there's a friendlier, warmer culture when people are working in a more relaxed environment. So, it's just something that I've noticed over the years when I visit different companies, and it's not to say that the other companies aren't doing the right thing for their company. Each company has to do what they feel is important, but it's just interesting to see the dynamic. So, if you do have a more professionally oriented organization and your offices are more professional and not without the game tables and without the food and the dogs and whatnot, that's okay. But what is it you're going to do to offset that though, to make your employees feel more comfortable and more relaxed, right?
So I love the fact that you have a specific idea in mind when you say professional. And I think we need to redefine what does professional really mean. It's going to not be about the outward persona, how your offices are set up, or that this is a law firm, so everyone's in their power suits.
Yeah, yeah, right, right.
So that I think that if we could redefine professional in 2025, that would be
Ooh,
step
let's
in the right
do it.
direction. I think that professionalism should have to do first and foremost with respect. Are people respected? Are people included and celebrated for their differences? Are they collaborative? Does every person's opinion count? That sort of a thing. I think that we could focus on really what makes us better equipped to perform our work and be able to reach those bars of excellence that we all want to reach, but not have it be defined by our attire or how our offices are set up.
Right, right. I love that. Redefine professional for this year. I think we need to. Especially there's gonna be a lot that's gonna be redefined this year, I have a feeling. So it'll be interesting to see what else comes to the table. I think that when you talk about, though, the employee resource groups, going back to that, there have been so many. I've actually interviewed a couple of people who are DEI experts, And it's interesting the number of employee resource groups out there that I was completely unaware of. There's just a lot. And some of the bigger companies, like you said, they'll allow their employees to come to HR and say, hey, there's a number of us here that would like to have XYZ resource group and be able to. Yeah, I'm kind of curious too. How many companies with employee resource groups do have their people on site versus a more broad employee resource group that includes people who aren't on site, who are maybe outside the state or even the region, right?
I think that the ERG should just simply serve the needs of the people. So no matter what it is, it really if it's not serving the needs of the people, then it really should what is it actually? So it's what do people want to rally around? And then I also think that there have been a lot of ones that are defined by race, by gender, both, or that sort of a thing, and sometimes it's about religious cultural backgrounds and that sort of a thing, which I think that that would be a good thing as long as there would be collaboration with other groups so that they would all get to be able to interact with one another, so they are not just simply siloed.
I've heard about that too, how other groups will, yeah, have like once a month, they'll invite one ERG group will invite another or invite people outside of their group to their meetings and whatnot to just kind of talk about and share the information on what their group is about. But I love when you say serve the needs of the people. So let's talk about that. What are the needs of the people in ERGs?
I think that sometimes it comes down to feeling like the odd person out. Do you remember how back in the day when the supervisor would say, "Okay, Thursday nights, we're all gonna meet at the corner bar or whatever for pizza and beers or whatever," and then you think about all the people who can't go, the people who, um, are Muslim and observe the fact that if pork is being served on the table, they can't eat anything else on the table. So you get pepperoni pizza on that table, they can't eat the veggie pizza, for example. The people who are in AA and they are really working on keeping their sobriety. The people who have to pick up their children at daycare. So they can't go afterwards. So what happens to all of these people? The people who are gluten dairy free, that pretty much it completely eliminates most pizzas, unless you go to, like, Mod Pizza, but in the bottom line of it all, it's to me, thinking that you're doing a good thing, but you are excluding other people. So I think that it's very important to be able to have inclusion be the focus, and that if people feel the need to talk about struggles that they're having, like women in tech, for example, I think that's a fantastic group because historically, women in tech have had a number of obstacles they've had to overcome, and they continue to have issues, and so being able to talk with other people about that, that's important. I just recently was accepted into a group of professional women. It's called the Authentic Asian, and it's for people who are Asian, half Asian, part Asian, and the different struggles that we have all had growing up and in today's workforce, and it's been extraordinary to me to see how the women are supporting one another, mentoring one another, providing their stories, but also ways that they have overcome prejudice and stereotypes and that sort of a thing. So I think that there's really not a group that you can have where people will not hopefully not just have support, but that they have like a purpose for the group. And there should be always a mission statement for the group. This is why we're having the group. These are the things that we're hoping to accomplish. This is what we would hope each person would contribute in terms of support and help to one another. And so it's not just a bunch of people who happen to be the same race or the same gender or whatever that are rallying around something, but there's actually a purpose for the group and how people are to learn from each other and support one another.
What are some other groups? I love this conversation. So, what are some of the other groups that we might not be aware of that might not lean in towards gender and race?
Oh, there are quite a few from the one of the organizations that I was in. There was a my favorite honestly was the recycling group because they were finding all of these different ways that the office was wasting a number of different resources, and then they were coming up with all sorts of different ways that things could be recycled, reduce, reuse, recycle, but then the different tips on how you could carry that into your home life were shared with everybody in the entire organization, and they provided a lot of humor, which was great, but then when they measured at the end of the year how much was saved in terms of resources by everyone pitching in to do their part, that gave everybody a really great feeling, so
That is amazing. I've never heard of that one. Oh my God, Joe, thank you for sharing that. Oh, this great suggestion for any company. And it doesn't matter the size of the company either. A recycling employee resource group. I love it. Any others that are unique like that?
the one that I always loved to support was there in the DC area. There is an organization called N Street Village, and they serve over 62% of the homeless women in DC. And their goal is not just to provide hots and a cot, but to actually do an intake with each woman to find out what was it that caused their homelessness. And then they had to come up with a plan and work with a social worker on how they were going to overcome that, whether or not it was education or drug use or whatever it was. And then they had different goals that they would have to reach every single day. If they were going to participate in meals, then they had to participate in cleanup or setup or that sort of a thing. And so that group would go in and sponsor workshops for the women. They would do all sorts of not just fundraising for money, which is always important, but also in-kind donations. Like people who would go to conferences would provide bins so that people could bring all those little shampoos and and bars of soap and everything from the hotels, and then they would collect all that and then donate those so that those could be put into just little intake bags for each person and that kind of a thing. So I really always enjoyed the work that they
What, okay, if somebody wanted to create a resource group like that, what would they call it then? Help the homeless or
that's what I love about the fact that you have individuals in organizations, and everybody's got a creative in their body. You just don't know that they have that sort of creativity, and so I think that that's really an important thing that nobody in HR, for example, comes up with the name, but the people from the group come up with their own names. Then you're not just part of a company, but you're part of a community and you're contributing members of the community. And I love how one of the characteristics that they have attributed to Gen Z is that they want to be a part of something bigger than themselves and they want to make a difference. So something like that really serves that need.
it's interesting because companies too can bring in outside agencies. We have one here in Phoenix called the Phoenix Rescue Mission. So companies here locally can work with Phoenix Rescue Mission then, employee resource group, and be able to work, Salvation Army or St. Vincent de Paul or the other big organizations that are out there. I mean, every city has them. And to be able to incorporate what you're doing inside of your company with some of these organizations would be huge too. There was a an association here in Phoenix called AWE, Arizona Women in Employment and Education. But basically, I was part of their organization, and what I contributed was helping women, not just homeless women, but women who were coming out of jail terms or prison terms. So people who were trying to return to the workforce that way. And unfortunately, they still have that, what would you call it, citation on their record as having been a former inmate. So for them, it was really difficult to try to find meaningful work. So we tried to work with them to find, and also we worked with companies who were willing to hire them so that we could then go out and be able to send their help them create their resumes. Because I mean, okay, so on a resume of an inmate who's been incarcerated for a long time, it's really hard for them to create a good resume, but you can. And somebody brought up the fact the other day, it was when I was talking to her, Barbara Bruna, she mentioned you don't have to just put down what your skills are, technical skills, put down what your soft skills are. And in fact, I saw a post yesterday on LinkedIn. There was a woman who was letting people know, if you need to create a resume and you don't have technical skills, maybe you've been a mom who's been home with her kids for the last 5 years and you want to return, include what some of your skills are, include any education that you've had. If you've been a volunteer, include your volunteer experience. What were you doing as a volunteer? And even people who have been incarcerated, what were you doing? Most people who are incarcerated have to work inside. So what were you doing there? One woman was a hairstylist. She did the hairstyling and she didn't even have a license. She wound up getting hired to be a hairstylist for another company that was part of AWE. So great success stories. And I loved it. So I think that this is a bigger conversation. I love the fact that DEI is going to be a conversation here and how we can work together to keep it live, to keep it active. Because I think overall, don't you believe that the population is still gonna want to foster and encourage DEI in the workplace?
Yes, and I decided that it doesn't depend on a company policy, it depends on us as individuals, and the person who I would highly recommend that you follow everything that he's going to share or say is Torrin Ellis, that's Torin, and the last name is Ellis, Ellis. He has helped even Fortune 5 companies with all things DEI, and I would say that I have learned more from him than any other individual. The impact that this person has had on my life in terms of reframing how I even think about things has been pretty dramatic. The year of George Floyd, it was interesting because he started out by sharing that I was an ally, and then midway through that year, he identified me as an advocate, and by the end, I felt like I was going to be somebody who you can't just say you can't be neutral on this, you have to be against racism. So I think that really helped shape how I would look at things going forward. And I remember talking with someone who says they didn't want to be anti anything. I said, "Well, no, you have to stand for something, or or it's kind of like where you throw if you don't have something specific that you're throwing your dart at, you're going to and if it's nothing, you're gonna hit your mark every time, and I think that that became really very influential, if you will, in terms of teaching me that you do need to be against the things that are wrong. You need to take a stand against what's wrong. I think there's that proverb that says that the only thing that is needed for evil to prevail is for good people to do nothing, and so I think that that's important.
That's an interesting statement. Interesting proverb. I don't know that I've heard of that one before. Hmm. So now how do we then band together and what do we do to help people find their meaning or find something that's meaningful to them who say that they don't have anything? And here's the thing, this is gonna basically waterfall down to other generations, right? We're seeing some disengagement, right, with some of the younger generations. So how do we help them right now to find purpose, to find something meaningful that they can embrace, that they want to embrace? Not that they're being forced into it, but something that they like, "Oh, yeah, okay, I can do that."
I think that it has to do with having leaders who inspire others, not people who manage you, but people who are going to inspire you. Unfortunately, the way that a lot of people become very passionate about different things is that they've experienced personal trauma. So we wouldn't wish that on anyone to have to go through a personal trauma. But at the same time, if they have colleagues that have been through personal traumas, being exposed to people who've had to walk through something differently. For example, I happened to be in the home of a couple who had very traditional family, if you will. Father, mother, one house, the 3 children, they all were college educated, etcetera, and somebody was visiting with them and showed them a video of their boyfriend's sister with the police coming in and the screaming matches that went on, and they were horrified to think that it was like they were being exposed to something that wasn't a television show. This was somebody that was actually this was somebody who it was almost like in their nuclear family or whatever, and to see how they processed that was very fascinating to me. It's as though many people aren't exposed to the pains in the world, the sorrows in the world. I don't think children should be exposed to these kinds of things, but once people are adults and they're in the working world, that just having not being assaulted by things, but just having the ability to hear other people's stories. I think that storytelling will change a lot of hearts.
Have you read the book Women Who Run with Wolves?
No, but that sounds great.
It's a good book, and it's about storytelling, and storytelling that goes back hundreds of years. because that's really how people used to teach. And there was a respect for elders because the elders is how the younger people learned their culture and traditions. And here in the United States, I think, because we are such a mixed cultural society, I think some of that storytelling has gone by the wayside, but it's not to say we can't bring it back, right? And I
Right.
love the fact that you're bringing up people who want to follow a leader that they like, right? So creating leaders that people want to follow. It's huge. And there are leaders that people want to follow. Maybe we should put a spotlight on that then. Maybe we should have a leadership employee resource group. Seriously, to inspire people once they get to that leadership level. How are you going to lead and what are you going to do, not just to lead your employees in your organization, but it extends out to your community around there. Somebody mentioned the other day during an interview that when you are hiring people and you're giving them their offer package, you might also include paid time off for community service.
Uh-huh. Right.
And I that was the first time I'd really heard that much about it. So let's talk about that for a minute. How many companies that are providing time off to their employees for participating in customer service? And how does the leadership trickle that down to their entire organization?
I've seen this in countless websites, so I don't know if it became a thing or a fad for companies to provide, but I really like when companies will continue to showcase what their employees are doing, and they share that, like, on a like, a careers page or whatever, where they can demonstrate what's going on. Then you see that it's not just, "Okay, here's your 8 hours per quarter to volunteer," but then they actually have people writing up what they've done, sharing with other people in the company what they've done, doing things together. I think that that's all very helpful. But another interesting thing to think about was that another company that I'd gotten to work in, they actually tied bonuses to performance evaluations. And some of the things that were in those performance evaluations were what was it that they accomplished in that quarter to be able to live the values of the company in terms of what their mission, vision, values were. And I feel like that's really being not just accountable as a company, but holding others accountable, especially the people who were the supervisors. In what way did you impact your team to be able to live out these things? And they would have to provide specific examples. So I can tell you that if somebody's bonus is on the line because they're going to get points or 0 points or 5 points, depending on how they answered each of those questions and had the ability to demonstrate that they were committed to that. I think that was a really positive thing, and I feel like it's not like forcing people to do things, but if you are going to have a statement on your website, it's just words if it's not being lived.
Mhm. Exactly. Well, and how do you create a vision statement or a value statement for your company that's not just Charlie Brown's teacher, rah, 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 that's something that people are gonna read? What can we include in a value statement?
Well, I always feel like it goes back to who you have in your organization. What is it that you all value? Why did you come here? Why do you stay here? Are you just here but looking? Or are you here because there's something that you care about that's being provided here? And I think that that would be a good conversation. Then you'll find out what's missing in terms of, okay, well, there just doesn't seem to be a respect by managers for XYZ, or there doesn't seem to be a respect for management, or just different things. I think it's a way of being able to identify, okay, where are we missing the boat and where are we excelling? And then pulling all that together to be able to, hello, we have AI now. You just put it into any one of those, those AI. And I've actually found a new friend. It's Claude. It's my favorite AI now. I used to use ChatGPT, but I'm just sold on Claude. Claude is now my best friend. We actually have conversations where I'm like, "Could you please?" And then after they do something, then it's like, "Oh, thank you so much." And then they respond. It's just sort of they're getting a feel for how I am as a person, and I'm finding that they're that it's really the algorithms are picking up the tone so that when they do write something for me, they have really learned my tone. So I'm sure that any one of these platforms, although Claude's my favorite, could be able to, if you put in all the different things, right, they can come out with statements that will be brilliant. Yep. Well, I also think that it's important to do demos of products that are going to help you to achieve the goals that you want in terms of having fair and equitable hiring and being able to target different pools of candidates rather than just your job boards. And so Greenhouse Software has an ATS that really provides you with everything that you need to be able to do all the things that I talked about in structured hiring. And I think they're worth a demo. And then Seek Out is a tool that I find I actually don't think I could ever recruit without it. They have this wonderful feature now where you can just, they have an AI feature built right in where you just simply put your job description in there and then put a few parameters in there, like if they have to be at an office or they have these other things, and they'll actually source for you. And they'll come back with all these different candidates. So can you imagine how much time you can save if you are a sourcer or recruiter to have a tool like that and that it's actually affordable? It's not a $20,000 a year.
Oh my gosh, that's the thing. I know some of these tools are so outrageous, and even some of the new tools that I demoed last year, they were charging LinkedIn prices, right, for their tools. And I said, how, what? Well, we do this and we do that. I said, yeah, but your algorithm is still built on LinkedIn technology. You're still tapping into LinkedIn. Going back to leadership though, because I think that this is, since everything flows down from leadership, when companies are hiring their executives, are we going to need to change this year and moving forward, especially since there is a push to ignore DEI on one end? Is there going to be a push then for leaders who are going to continue to embrace it?
I think that the screening process, first of all, you look at what do they post across wherever they are on social media, you should be checking that out. What are they sharing on LinkedIn? Do they have their own Instagram account? Do you see diversity in their personal lives? The one thing is that you can be committed to doing something, but if your personal life just shows that you mostly just hang out with people who are just like you, I'm going to question how sincere you are. And if you have not been making friends or becoming part of community groups or whatever that of people that don't look just like you or act just like you, then I think that that would be something to look into. I also think that there should be a whole entire set of questions that are asked during the screening process that specifically identify what people's thoughts are about what does a diverse workforce look like to you? How would you go about ensuring that your workforce reflects your community? Or in what ways have you in the past promoted equality in the hiring process? Or tell me about the ways that you have been inclusive in your organization of people who come from different backgrounds. What are some of the initiatives that you have spearheaded?
I love that. Maybe even have them write a new value statement for their company. If you were going to create a value statement for this company, what would it be? Or a mission
Right.
statement?
And why?
And why? That's actually really good. I love that. Ooh, good stuff. Yeah, because I think that it's going to be leadership top down this year with companies, don't you? In terms of what's going to stay inside of an organization with respect to diversity initiatives, employee resource groups, that type of thing. And being able to, like you said, it's not even a matter of it being a requirement. It's just something people are going to want to do. I mean, just naturally. So, looking at leadership and being able to message out to leaders because I think that they can be a little harder to reach at times. So, how are we going to message out to them that this is what we want as a community? This is what we want as a country, that we want to continue those initiatives, and that you're going to be better served as an organization if you allow these initiatives to continue, allow these employee resource groups to flourish, right?
Or that you just completely regroup and say, okay, well, how are we doing as a company? And I think that's where you start is you do an internal assessment. You audit yourselves. And I think that without that, you can't really throw things out unless whether or not you have a need for them. Just simply to say, okay, well, that's what I don't understand. I cannot wrap my brain around anyone at a company saying, well, we don't need to focus on having a diverse workforce. We don't we don't need to be inclusive. We don't need to have an equitable process. It's like, I'm sorry. What do you s what do you stand for, and who works in your company that would tolerate being somewhere where that is not a priority to the company? That it's just a scary time for me
It
to
is.
think of.
Well, and not only that, but look what you're excluding. You have to look at what you're excluding, like, to your point. I recall about 4 years ago, we had a big project with one of our semiconductor equipment clients, and they wanted us to go and identify people, especially women in tech, identify people who had left the company who may be willing to come back. And we did. That was our focus, was to bring back people from especially people from underrepresented minority groups and women in tech, because they wanted to bolster their women in tech initiatives for their different organizations, supply chain engineering, manufacturing, executive leadership. And honestly, it was a very successful mission. And the reason is because those people had left because maybe there was some leadership they were working for at the time that they left that is no longer there. And that I've seen that happen a couple times, because when you do have a changeover in leadership, if people are encouraged by that change, they are willing to come back. So it was a really interesting project to work on and see the outcome of it as a result of the change of leadership.
Well, the one thing that I think would be take that success even to the next level would be to ensure that whatever reasons they left, that you create things within the company that will ensure that those things don't happen again.
Exactly.
Then they'll stay. So it's one thing to bring them back. It's another thing for them to stay.
Love it. Great conversation. Anything else you can think of that we should chat about before we sign off?
Well, the one last thing that I always feel passionate about is that when you are going through your recruiter screen, I think that the most important question you can ask is, so tell me, what are your career goals? And you actually listen to what somebody wants to accomplish. And if they can't accomplish that in your company, you need to right then explain to them why that this might not be a fit because they wouldn't be able to achieve those goals. And then most recruiters are connected with countless other recruiters. So make sure that people that you can refer that particular prospect to or that candidate to, that where they could achieve their goals. I can tell you that that will buy you more referrals than anything else that you can do, because people will know that you respect them enough to say, "Hey, I'm not gonna try to sell you this job or sell you this company, but I wanna make sure you're gonna achieve your goals." And then when you hear their goals and they can accomplish them, make sure that HR has a career pathing for every single role in the company so that on day one, when people are being onboarded into the company, or I like to say week one, that they learn what it is that they're going to need to do to be able to achieve those goals and that they can start working on those.
I love it. That's fabulous. Thank you so much, Joe. I always enjoy our conversations. They always take on a different spin every time we talk, but this was a great conversation. And I really hope that everyone listening really follows along and can share this video and this podcast with other people, because I think it's an important conversation. And I'm really glad that we had this discussion.
Well, I always enjoy our conversations. They always stimulate all sorts of ideas,
Yeah.
that
They
sort
do.
of things. So I enjoy that greatly. And I just thank you again, for chatting with me today. Very grateful.
Oh, thank you, Joe. All right.